So yeah, the plan for the session is a brief introduction from me and a project neighbourhood update from Becca. It's going to last around 30 minutes, and then we're going to get into the conversation for the remaining hour, because I think we've got an hour and a half session for the lunchtime one. So just very briefly, so you know what urban movement is, and I'm not going to dwell on this at all. We're an urban design and transport practice based in London. We bring together urban designers, landscape architects, planners, traffic engineers, and transport planners, all working towards that sort of goal of creating better places for people and improving quality of life through the design of cities, neighbourhoods, and their public realm. Worth pausing on the fact we've been instructed by the Dartmouth Park Neighbourhood Forum, as you'll know. We are expressly neutral. We do not represent any public body or community organisation. We've been asked to host this series of community conversations for your area and to provide this forum where you as local people and businesses can come together just to air your views, your ideas, importantly, and your concerns. And the aim is to see if we can find a consensus, agree what we think the future should be for traffic in the area, and how we might create better streets and public spaces for community life, for business, for health, for children, and for generally life, for example. So we want to hear your worries and concerns for sure, and it'd be interesting to discuss those today. But I don't simply want to focus on those negatives because it's a little bit too easy. So I'll invite you to suggest what a successful neighbourhood street network in Dartmouth Park has to achieve or look like going forward, in your opinion, to be successful. What are these metrics for success? And with this, what we're trying to get from this session as an output is really that sort of designer's brief, an agreed way forward or a consensus from the neighbourhood that if a designer were to follow, they should be able to draw something up that met everyone's ambitions, but also protected against the things that people are worried about. And that's what we want to talk about today. So just to plainly say, we're not drawing up anything. We have no plans. We're not proposing any solutions. I simply want to understand your concerns and ideas so we can help the community as a whole to agree what successful outcome looks like. And that being said, before I run through a few ideas to get the conversation going, I'd just like to invite you all to start now, putting your ideas, your thoughts, your ambitions for the area in the chat, because how we're going to work this is when we get to the conversation stage, I'm going to work my way through the chat and then just invite you to make those points, make those comments, make those ideas to the group, and we can then discuss them. And we're going to work through in that way, so everyone can have their say, whatever they want to say. But that just adds a bit of structure to it because we've got quite a few people here, so that's probably the easiest way for that to do. And in the meantime, if you can please stay muted when others are speaking throughout, I'll be most grateful. So I'm just going to pass over to Becca now, and for a neighbourhood snapshot. And so I'm going to switch the share, if you don't mind, and then we'll get Becca started.
Great, thank you, Chris. So Chris will be my glamorous assistant while I go through this. So this is our project area. So it also follows the same boundaries as the Dartmouth Park neighbourhood plan. And this is the area that we're working in. The next slide, please. So I wanted to start by touching on some recent engagement work that's been done in the area to kind of set the scene a little bit. So the first one that was done fairly recently was the Camden Commonplace survey that was done. It's about COVID-19 measures, but it's still useful to look at. This was done last summer, and looking at this plan, you can kind of see where there are lots of comments that have been made. So the thing that stands out for me, at least, is Chetwynd Road here. So this seemed to have a lot of the comments in the local area. And the sort of things that were raised are things about high traffic flows, congestion. It was hard to cycle on narrow pavements caused by parked vehicles and poor air quality. Other areas that kind of come up a little bit, you can see Swains Lane has quite a few comments, and that's generally around pedestrian crossings and rat running. Comments around Chester Road with narrow pavements, again, rat running. And comments around the businesses on York Rise, people would like more space for seating and to kind of socialise around there. Concerns with road safety around Highgate Road as well, and Gordon House Road. And the general sort of concerns that were raised for the area were things around rat running traffic, school run traffic, and safety outside schools as well. Next slide, please. So another thing that was done last year was the Dartmouth Park Neighbourhood Forum survey. This was done in July, and it was focused on getting the community's views on traffic and travel in the area, kind of as we came out of lockdown, I suppose, the first lockdown. And this had around 400 responses. And I was reading through these survey responses to get a flavour of issues in the area that were raised by respondents. And one thing I did was I went through all the open-ended questions at the end, and I noted down every time a street was mentioned. And that's what made. So the thicker the line, the more times a street was mentioned. So you can see that Chetwynd Road is our front runner here. That had 85 comments made about it, followed by Highgate Road, which was 23, Dartmouth Park Hill, 22, York Rise, Swains Lane, Chester Road, Dartmouth Park Road, Twiston Road. These all had a fair number of comments that you can see on the plan. And what I would also say is that these comments aren't all necessarily bad, but what this showed me, I guess, is that gave me some insight into some of the key streets in the area that we might be looking at. So other responses that people gave to the questions that weren't open-ended also highlighted some general issues in the area. For example, 82% thought there was too much traffic in Dartmouth Park before lockdown, and at least half of respondents said their immediate local area suffers from pollution, rat running and speeding, and 94% appreciated the fall in traffic and improved air quality during lockdown, which I think is probably true for most of London. Obviously, the survey respondents here don't represent every resident, and you're all going to have your own comments and extra insights and things like that. But I thought it was just an interesting starting point to start to understand the area better. Next slide, please. So from that, kind of wanted to have a look at some of the data we have and understand some of our local challenges in a bit more detail. So next slide, please. So I had a look at some of the traffic counts in the area from a variety of sources, and the things that sort of jump out. So just to explain, the bigger the dot, the higher the traffic count. And so we can see straight away that Highgate Road has quite high traffic flows. So it's sort of 10 to 12,000 vehicles per day. And as a comparison, that's more than Caledonian Road. And at the top end is similar to Seven Sisters Road at 12,500 vehicles per day. And to the east, you can see down the southern end of Dartmouth Park Hill, we have 9 to 10,000 vehicles per day, and that is more than Baker Street, and is also similar to Amwell Street and King's Cross, around 10,500 vehicles per day. So both central London streets, which I think is quite surprising for what is essentially a residential road. But the thing that really stands out for me here again is our old friend Chetwynd Road. So compared to the counts we have for the other residential roads in this area, and I appreciate we don't have counts for every street, but they are this sort of has annual daily flows of around 3,000 to 5,000 vehicles per day. And if you compare that to the other roads we have, they're a more standard kind of 1,000 to 2,000 vehicles per day, which is in line or below the average for minor urban roads in Great Britain, according to the road traffic estimates from 2018, the latest data we have. And for a comparison for the flows on Chetwynd Road, at the lower end, the 3,500 vehicles per day, that is the same or slightly less than Chancery Lane. And at the higher end, 5,500 vehicles per day is the same as Portman Square in Westminster. And I think that's quite surprising for a residential road. So next slide, please. Right, and so that sort of leads us into air quality. So I've got here a nitrogen dioxide, and just to explain, the EU limit is 40 micrograms of nitrogen dioxide per cubic metre of air, bit of a mouthful. And you can see on this map, so that the dots that are green are below that EU legal limit. So you can see for most of the streets in the area, that's generally the reading we've got is around 38, 39. But you can see there are some sections where this is obviously worse. So things that, again, that stand out, not surprising given the high traffic flows, but Highgate Road is a bit of a culprit for this. So we have highs of 65, which is similar to nearby Junction Road, which has 66, and other sort of north-south routes in the area, but is also the same as some sections of Regent Street. So that is quite poor. And then Dartmouth Park Hill, we have some high readings on there, highs of 58, which is quite similar to Notting Hill Gate, for example. And Gordon House Road, highs of 57, which is similar to some sections of Cheapside in the City of London. But I think, again, the thing that surprises me as well, perhaps not given the flows, but Chetwynd Road has some readings above the legal limits. So while most of the readings are either on or just above the legal limit, 40, 41, there is a high of 52 of one section just to the east of York Rise. And that is not really something we would expect in a residential street, particularly when you compare it to the other streets in the area. So you can see that kind of reflects the high traffic flows. I think one thing that I did want to note from this map is that you can kind of see from this that poor air quality along a street isn't just a problem along the busy roads, it does bleed back to the other roads behind it and nearby. So you can see for Chetwynd Road, we have readings, 40, 41 on Churchill Road, Spencer Rise, Wisdom Road, Lissenden Gardens for Highgate Road, and for Gordon House Road as well. So you can see how the problem isn't just isolated to those streets. Next slide, please. Okay, and one thing we obviously have here is when we're thinking about challenges in the area is the topography. So if we're thinking about walking and cycling around the area, this is obviously something that we need to consider and take into account. And then I also, as part of the data collection, I looked at collisions in the area. So this is the data for the last 3 years to May 2020, which is the latest I had when I requested it at the end of last year. And what you can see is there is a clear kind of cluster around the junction of Highgate Road and Gordon House Road, Chetwynd Road. And there's a few extra around kind of Swains Lane and Chester Road as well as a couple around York Rise, Chetwynd Road Junction. And what this, so just as an insight, that's 40 over the last 3 years. 39 of these were slight and 1 was serious. The serious collision involved a cyclist, and that was on Swains Lane, the cyclist that was injured. As a general snapshot of who's been injured in these collisions, 35% of these were vulnerable road users, which is what we would call pedestrians and cyclists. Also worth noting victims of this, so 15% of collisions involved children, so people under 16, and 13% involved people over 60. So in terms of our age ranges, they're our most vulnerable. There's definitely something to take into account there. Next slide. Okay, and now on to school travel data. So you're quite unusual, I would say, in your area in that you have four secondary schools in a small area, and you have this one primary as well. We don't have hands-up data for all of these schools, but for the ones we do have, I think it's a pretty good picture. So for Brookfield Primary, we have nearly 80% of kids walking, which is great, and 11% are driven, which is fairly low for primary. So that's fairly good news. Looking at the secondary schools, Ackland, Burley and Parliament Hill, we have data for, and walking is around 40 to 50% of journeys, and the rest are sort of covered over in bus, tube and sort of rail overground travel. And again, car use pretty low. So that's quite good, but what that tells me for looking at this area is that we'll have lots of young people walking around the area, particularly between school sites. I know the secondaries share some of their teaching, so that's definitely something we need to take into account. And final slide, please. So finally, to hand back to Chris, this is a snapshot, a few elements of data of the area. So now we need to think about, I suppose, how we want to address these challenges. So back to you, Chris.
Okay, that's a very valuable snapshot. So I just want to sort of take you through some of the ways in which we can think about streets now, to sort of help set what we want to achieve the streets we're looking at. In the last 9 months, so much has happened, and we as communities have been hearing about streets and discussing streets way more than we ever have, I think, and that's because, from my perspective, we've been made really aware of how streets can damage our health and improve our health and sort of unlock opportunity in sort of high streets and in communities. And with these intensified discussions about streets, we've tried to sort of open the process up and empower and inform communities to decide what they want their streets to look like. Looking at how we can plan street networks, thinking about movement streets and high streets in the context of residential streets and school streets. And for high streets, I think, what do we want these places to look like? How might we start thinking about creating more safe space for people, space for community life? And what space do we want for business? It has to be an inclusive space along high streets, without doubt. So we must design for everyone, young to old, and not exclude anyone when we start thinking about these designs. Some high streets across the UK recently have started looking about how they can sort of change their relationship around vehicle access, sort of maybe restricting some vehicles to certain sections at certain times of the day. That can open up opportunities to invite more people to occupy the space of high streets safely, but needs to be thought about wholesale and designed with communities, of course. But there is an option that we can think about. So it'll be interesting to hear your reflections around that later on in the chat, and please do get any thoughts in the chat. Residential streets are a key focus for our conversation today, of course, and And this one was a lot to unpack. And I think it's really worth thinking about that between 2009 and 2020, in London, residential streets have quietly, or actually not so quietly, increasingly become shortcuts and routes for people in cars who are sort of avoiding traffic-filled main streets. And a large part of this is apps like Waze and other sort of traffic dodging applications have played a huge part. But essentially, traffic on residential streets between 2009 and 2020 in London has increased by 30%. So that's 20. It's a huge number of more miles being driven on residential streets. So really something to think about and reflect on, and thinking if you're happy with that, if that's what you want for the future of your street, or indeed if you're very happy for that to continue, that's something to think about. You'll have also heard about school streets, I'm sure, and these are another thing that would be good to sort of see what your ambitions are. Essentially, ways to ensure that just outside the school gates is a safe space where our children can scoot a bit, play, breathe clean air on the way to and from school. And basically, we can make it so that only things moving at the pace of our kids use the street out front of school gates at drop-off and pick-up times. And here instead, we can invite play, we can introduce colour and make streets quite special and attractive for children. Streets are well known for movement, and we can all very easily relate to streets as places of movement. This year, we've been made very aware that we can be a little bit smarter with the space we have sometimes, and in some cases have to be rather than can be. With a lot of people avoiding public transport over the last 9 months, we just haven't had the space in every street to allow everyone who needs to drive. So a lot of streets across the UK and indeed globally have tried to give people viable alternatives. And that meant making sort of safe street networks of direct and comfortable walking and cycling routes, so that people wanted to choose to walk and cycle could and keep streets and public transport clear for key workers could do so safely. So with that, we needed to introduce segregation of cycling infrastructure from vehicle space and importantly from walking space, introduce regular crossing points, introduce trees and planting to invite people to use these things. And that's the key point there, is we have to sort of not waste time and money, because we have to make good invitations if we want someone to do something. Otherwise, we don't do that. And Becca's already introduced this idea, and this sort of thinking introduces this hierarchy of road users concept, which is something we should think about in our conversations today. And essentially, it's a very clear way to structure how we can design streets, highlighting that the road users most at risk in the event of a collision. And those road users who are most at risk are placed at the top of the hierarchy. So as designers, we have a responsibility to create streets that ensure the safety of the most vulnerable road users. So the ones most likely to be injured in the event of a collision, pedestrians, in particular children, older adults and disabled people, followed by cyclists, horse riders, motorcyclists. And so is this how you want to start thinking and designating the streets around Dartmouth Park to really think about protecting those vulnerable road users first and foremost? And just to be sort of open, that in London, the arguments sort of often fall around how we can create safe, attractive sort of space for cycling, because on the whole, thankfully, we already have safe space for walking, but not always. And good to hear your reflections on sort of walking environments. And importantly, this sort of when we try to think about creating safe space for cycling, it has to be space that actually makes people think, oh, I'll leave the car today. I'll pop to the fishmongers on the bike. Space that really invites people, the people who want to mix things up and change their behaviour once in a while. So in that, we have to sort of design this cycling infrastructure into main streets, and here's an example of that which has been done recently. But I think importantly, very much for this area, a huge part of the puzzle is creating the conditions where children feel comfortable cycling in their local residential streets. And I suppose I've said the word cycling several times, which I know can annoy some people, rightly or wrongly. And I don't want to get hung up on cycling at all, I must admit. Because I think creating residential streets that children feel comfortable cycling on is by no means a cycling project. It's about it's almost like an indicator for making streets safer for children, streets for children feel comfortable playing on. Once again, it's about making residential streets nicer places to relax, to sit, to talk with neighbours. And this inevitably means reducing the number of vehicles using the street as a rat run, and slowing the vehicles which are on those residential streets down to safer speeds. Clearly, this has been the focus of a lot of strategies across the UK and globally. So we really want to hear from you after this, about our streets and public spaces, and the space can yield so much for us, I suppose. And what do we want the spaces we have to achieve? What do we want to do for our sense of local community with our streets, for our business prosperity, and for our health? All questions I think we should answer going forward. So please do get your sort of initial thoughts in the chat and we can explore them. Worth reflecting on these measures we have seen have some big results. And I think it would be remiss not to chat about those today as well. Recent studies from University of Westminster have been looking at programs aimed around reducing rat running traffic and slowing vehicles on residential streets. And it looked at projects between 2012 and 2019, which were aiming to do this. And the study found that sort of absolute injury numbers and injury risk decreased substantially inside these neighbourhoods where rat running and through traffic was reduced. So this estimated improvement in walking and cycling safety, interestingly, would bring the UK into line with the best European countries, in fact, which is an interesting reflection. And simply in terms of traffic, this sort of longitudinal study found that, in one example, that the overall reduction in traffic of around 27% across the area investigated, with car traffic levels down on the majority of roads that bound the neighbourhood. So it isn't as simple as the surrounding streets lose out is the results of a longitudinal study, because we're looking at sort of behaviour change and dispersion. Traffic levels were also down on the streets inside the neighbourhood, with car traffic down on average around 62% from the project studied, and goods vehicles down by about 51% in the area studied. So that there's clearly some benefits to these areas with the data we have, but of course I'm sure they're not perfect, and there's no one size fits all solution. So what is perfect for your neighbourhood, do you think, or indeed do you think you already have it? Moving on just quickly, this is a sort of system I'd really like to focus the conversation on today, because I think it's a really clear way of thinking about our streets. I think we all understand that streets have a role to play in movement, but streets have a really equally important role to play in place. And I think of a city you visited and loved, and you'll think of streets pretty quickly. At least I sure hope it's not just me that does that. But we have movement on the y-axis here, and we have place on the x-axis. Local significance towards the centre, and sort of city scale strategic significance at the extremities. And the different types of streets, which we can all kind of relate to those names, they populate the graph. So we've got local residential streets bottom left, and high place value, little sort of or reduced kind of strategic significant movement function, and then arterial main roads top left with very little place function, massive movement function. So hopefully you get the idea of this and you can relate to. And we've just sort of put some flesh on the bone of these street types. I'm not expecting you to read that now, it's much more of a reference after. And for the purposes of our chat today, currently the streets of Dartmouth Park arguably sit within this section of the graph. Streets are primarily for local significance and have a varying place dimension, with movement sometimes dominating, is probably how I'd sum it up. So we have streets sitting as connectors, providing routes for medium distances. Chetwynd Road comes to mind, as well as Dartmouth Park Hill. We also have high streets providing access, but focusing on community life. So I suppose the way we might like to focus your input into the chat is we could keep this the same and do nothing. Is that what you think is required? We could increase movement function on our local streets, really increase their movement significance if this is something the community want. And that means making them into sort of high roads or arterial roads, streets that provide reliable routes for vehicles going through London. It's certainly an option. Conversely, we can think about increasing their place significance, rethinking them as local streets, local spaces, streets, seeing streets really as quiet, safe and desirable areas that foster that community spirit and local pride. Importantly, it's a scale. So we increase one, we reduce the other. We can't have our sort of cake and eat it in this respect. We have to sort of think of that in the scales. So just quickly to bring this to life, to help the conversation, and please don't read into these as proposals because they're just simply not. We've got local streets sitting as connectors, narrow pavements, quite tight parking spaces. I'm sure you can imagine or picture which street I might be talking about. And we've also got quite a tight movement functionality in the middle of a street, and then sort of it's mirrored on both sides. So we could take this in the direction of a high road or an arterial street, as I said. And this would require us to make space for more unimpeded movement, really. So we'd need to look at rationalising parking on one side to make driving through the street easier with wider lanes. And with this, we wouldn't really be able to have any more space for pavements and walking environments because we're using it for that unimpeded vehicle movement. It's going to end up looking at something like Adelaide Road, I suppose, for a local example. And we can also go the other way, looking to programme streets as local spaces and really see them as local streets. And with this, we need more space on the pavements for people walking, but also more space for people chatting, staying, sitting, playing outside businesses. We don't have to make anything one way, as a sketch might suggest at first glance. So if we're downgrading that movement function of a street, we can sort of create moving zones and passing zones. And just to quickly illustrate, it's what they do on Mount Street, if you know it. So vehicles move down the street in both directions, but when two are coming towards each other, they wait for the passing points in the street. And for passing points, you could just quite read gaps in parking is probably the less technical term. And if we continue this journey a little more, we can sort of down the graph, we can think of local streets as town squares, community spaces. And this means working to slow the fewer vehicles that are in our streets, normally ones which are just pulling up at home or dropping off your groceries. So that streets and public spaces through which vehicles crawl when they're not busy with life. And there are plenty of these around. They become intense areas of community pride and flourishing local businesses that people cherish when they're done right. And just to finish off, a quick run through of a quick peek at the toolbox. Things we can put in streets to make some of these changes, and maybe just to sort of to have a think about the kind of these which of these you might quite like to see in your streets, and do get that message in the chat. So we can temporarily invite people to occupy streets. I know you've sort of seen this activity outside the pub in the summer, which sort of treating streets as spaces for a timed period. And it's important to make a sort of strong invitation. So we can also include greening and shade and shelter, comfortable, flexible seating, and the little creature comforts that make us really comfortable to occupy public spaces. We can sort of curate performances as part of this as well, and sort of bring events and bring people together on our streets. And I'm sure we're all hoping we can do that again soon. And if we're moving down towards this kind of place function, we can also start to reinforce this with some informality to make streets a sort of relaxing environment to spend time in. Streets don't have to be this sort of rectilinear movement function. When we bring placing, we can bring in sort of more informality in these slower speeds. This is probably an extreme example, but trees, sort of shade, shelter, and green, important for our mental and physical health, of course. And when we maximize that sort of place value, we can really start to open up these opportunities. So is this a clear sort of opportunity for you in terms of what you want to see as a future of streets? Interestingly, our streets have been laid out in a certain way for a very long time. But I think it's important to not sort of stop questioning things. And when our streets are designated to prioritize vehicles, we often end up having to wait for vehicles. But when we maximize the place function, we can change that, and we can change the environment to make vehicles kind of subservient to people. So on simple side roads, we can have the pavement running across side roads, so people have priority. Very much like if you have a driveway in the front of your house, you don't sort of just zoom straight into your driveway. If someone's crossing that pavement, you let them sort of pass, and that's the same principle on these quiet side streets when we have that kind of place-driven streetscape. You'll have seen some of these, and allowing sort of huge permeability for people walking and cycling, but limiting permeability for vehicles has a time and a place. So you might want to think if this could work more than it already does in Dartmouth Park. Some streets in the neighbourhood already do this with great effect, clearly. So do you want more of this or less of this? And then just bringing sort of play into streets is an option when we max out the place value. Play should really be an everyday part of life for us all, not just children. So it makes sense to not sort of shove it behind fences over there somewhere. Let's have it outside our front doors and encourage children to play in streets again. We can do it, but it does require change. We can use the space outside our houses for community growing, or outside schools for green classrooms and forest schools. Is that something you might like us to explore? And this goes hand in hand with that idea of school streets, which I referenced earlier. Should we do more of these? It'd be great to hear from parents and carers on this one as well. Get your thoughts in the chat, please, on school streets, and we'll come to it. Equally, we think about that in a larger scale, thinking about school routes. routes that actually sort of invite children to walk and cycle safely from their house to school on these kind of fun, green and easy to follow routes. What do you want the first word for your child thinks about when they think of their street? This is my street, which has been designated a play street, and allows these kind of activities to take hold at the times of day that the residents want. And we can really make streets into sort of community centres. And I think it's important to know that we can still allow for so much, and that's why this conversation is really important. We can allow vehicles to deliver, we can allow access, we can allow all these things, but we can also make sure that people come first and community comes first. So it's just about sort of where you want to see that on that scale. And of course, sort of planting, and I won't touch too much, but sophisticated natural drainage systems as well can protect us against climate change and actually provide habitat and increase biodiversity on our streets. So streets can be for this and incorporated into more formal pocket parks, or we can fit greening in all kinds of ways. And it's more is more greening, more planting, more trees, something you're interested in. You'll have all seen these being in Camden, very familiar with them. Do you want more or fewer sort of cycle parking systems like this on our streets? And space for business, it'd be really great to hear from the businesses on the call. Do you want more seating outside your cafe or your pub? Do you want more space for markets or outside shops or sort of pop-up business events? And another thing to think about, maximizing, I say it again, that baggy space is something we can do on a lot of streets, no matter where they are on that graph. And again, streets have traditionally been designed in kind of a wasteful way, I think. You can think about a street, I'm sure that you know, which has white line hatching on it. I always think the designer must have thought, but that area is just a part of London we just don't want, despite the fact that there's astronomical land values here. And I kind of refuse to accept that. I think with especially in place value streets, you can use that space for good. We can activate adjacent businesses, we can provide community spaces and space for green. So anything you want. So is this something you'd like us, not us, is this something you'd like to explore? And finally, and now before we get into the conversation, I want to invite you to think about what's possible, what we've sort of run through there and more, what you want your streets to be for in the future, and that would be great to discuss. And thinking back to the graph, I'd like to just now ask you to fill in this quick poll that you're about to see, what you think, which direction you want to take the streets in. So hopefully it's fairly simple, but sort of explaining it on there. And I'll just launch that. If this works, it's always a risk. Hopefully you can see that. So I'll leave that up for a minute. Which way do you want your local streets to go? So we're sort of looking at the movement function at the top of that page there. Connectors, high streets, a lot of them staying the same in the middle. We don't have to do anything. Or at the bottom, we're sort of thinking about that sort of place-focused streets, so more local streets, more residential streets. And we're not defining what these need to look like at all. We're just sort of saying which general movement we might think we want to go in, and of course it would be the residents who decide what that sort of form that takes in the future. But it's more of a sort of general focus of where we're going. So yeah, please do get your thoughts in that. I'll leave it up for another few seconds. Got 40% of you who put your thoughts to me, so it'd be nice to get some more of that. 45. Be really good to get it more. I might flash this up a little later on as well, just to see if your thoughts have changed and you want more movement focus, or you want more place focus at the end. That would be interesting to see. We're at 48%. Can I tempt 50? I feel a bit like a bingo presenter now. I think I'm not seeing any change.
Great auctioneer, Chris.
So that's not budging. So I'm gonna leave it there. I'm gonna end that poll, and I'll just share the results with you. So that's what we've got. So yeah, for those of you who did vote, and that's half of you on the call. Of course, some people are calling in, so not so easy. We've got sort of 94% of the people who were able to take part have looked for that more place focus. That's an interesting reflection to lead us into our conversation. So I'm going to stop sharing that poll now, and I can bring it up later, of course. It'd be really great to move into the chat now and get your thoughts. I suppose, again, just to sort of focus our chat, I think we really want to know what success looks like for you, the kind of parameters that you think we should be looking. What's that kind of designer's brief? So I'm going to start at the top. Samantha Collett, you got in there first. Thank you very much. Would you like to make your comments? I can he says confidently.
She's just told me that her video's playing up, so she is here, but we may not be able to see her.
That's perfectly fine. I'm just going to see if I can. Right, Samantha, can you speak to us? You should be able to unmute yourself now if you'd like to make your point. I see you've unmuted, so maybe you're about to, or you're having trouble with your internet. I'm not sure. Fine. Feel free to step back in. But Samantha's been saying she would like to see cleaner streets. So that's something to wait. It'd be interesting if you are able to talk to really sort of boil down into what you mean in that. If it's sort of litter or dog mess, that would be certainly something which we hear a lot about. And also you made the point that sort of easier access to enable pedestrians to walk, not just park cars. So that idea of creating sort of clear, unobstructed pavements is a huge one. That's something we can definitely take away. Just moving. Sorry, Becca.
No, so I was just going to say that's something that is brought up further down the chat as well. Yes, carry on. Sorry.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to getting to that. Catherine, Max, would you like to sort of make your point to the group and we can discuss? You should be able to unmute.
Yeah, I just did that. Being me, I've made lots of points.
Sorry, the first one, but you're welcome to please give us a summary of them all as you're on.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first one, if you're just going down that list, which I hadn't anticipated, I just said equitable, and I think a lot of people have raised this. It's really important that we don't have any perverse consequences of suggestions that we make. Quite rightly, Chetwynd Road comes up a lot. They've been negatively impacted as a result, people living along there, as a result of some decisions which may well have been rational at the time. We don't want to, and this has come up in general forum discussions a number of times. I think we don't want to do anything. We might want to improve that, but not wholly at the expense of anybody else. It's about how we make this work for as many people as possible in different ways, and I think generally speaking, people would support that as an underlying message. So really, that was what was behind equitable.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, and I'm kind of taking that as both sort of equitable in the design of streets, but also equitable in taking a neighbourhood approach and sort of a more holistic approach. Am I right to read that into your remarks?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
That's
Any or all of those things. Yeah.
It's a really important thing to take away and just sort of almost a line in the sand. That's kind of what we're trying to get to, is if it has to achieve this to be successful in the community's eyes, and that's certainly something I'd like to take away. Was there any more points you'd like to make as you've made some? Or should I bring you back in when you made that point? Is that?
Whatever is most useful to you. I think something that I've said in various ways, perhaps the chat, is kind of thinking smartly about the interface, and it's implicit in what you've been suggesting or putting on the table, is thinking smartly about the interface between a movement discussion and a general greening discussion. And we've got a great opportunity to think about how the greening can be supportive of and even nudging how people move, where they move, thinking about greening key points and directing people that way. So I'd be keen to see.
Can I read into that sort of increased greening, increased habitat, biodiversity is something that you'd like as a kind of metric for future success?
Well, it was more specific than that. So yeah, I mean, I think generally that's really important, and I think that's come through as important in the neighbourhood plan, full stop. But taking it a step further, thinking about what are the greening features which will support the movement side of
So like greening along, I think you mentioned something about greening along walking routes and things like that. So kind of identifying like green corridor type things. I'm not meaning to put words in your mouth, but just in terms of
that's fine. No, that's not at all. That's a helpful example of what that might look like. And if you have, if you make the shops around York Rise, that area greener, if you do greening by the library, you signal that these are places that people might want to be walking between. Yeah.
That's a really nice idea. Thank you for that.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
I'll invite Jane Mayhew to make her point now, if I may. You should be able to unmute yourself. and that's the sort of first point about sort of waiting to residents' health.
Yeah, yes, I also made a few points.
Yeah,
Actually,
thanks for that.
Catherine has made some probably far more eloquently than I have. I suppose I've lived in Chetwynd Road for quite a long time, and I raised this point at previous meetings about the pollution and so on. I live quite close to the traffic lights, so we have the added delight of the idling cars, the all-night sirens, and the general sort of aggression you get from that area. So, I mean, I hope that will go, but it's worth mentioning. But I suppose I would add to the other comments that there is bound to be an attempt at a veto at whatever we do. I've seen previous emails where say, "Oh, not Chetwynd Road again," you know, and I can quite understand that there are a lot of other people, a lot of other residents in the area that look upon Chetwynd Road and think, "Oh, there, but for the grace of God, go." We would just let them have the pollution because at least our houses, you know, are worth more. You know, we live longer and all the rest of it. But I don't know how you do it. But I think one of the things that we will need to address is how to convince them of, as Catherine said, the fairness of an approach where, you know, we all can benefit from, you know, living close to Hampstead Heath, all the rest of it. The children can benefit from those things, and everything. In other words, I think cutting it down to precisely, I would say that I don't think there should be an equal weighting for some people's mild inconvenience and some people's slight increase in traffic, with the huge effect on mental health, but public health, including, and you probably can hear from my voice, the people who developed asthma from living along this road. The people opposite me, they had to leave because their children developed asthma. So one of my questions, and I'll stop now, was, has any research been undertaken on, I'm sure King's would do it, on the incidence of respiratory illnesses along the stretch of road, which I would say was Chetwynd, but of course it's not just Chetwynd, it's other sort of connecting roads as well, because I think that is fundamental, and actually that would also help to, if you like, alleviate some of the closed doors that one will get as soon as one, you know, in other words, there is evidence, this is dangerous, can you really support this? Is it ethical that you should allow this to happen, even though, you know, your streets may have a little bit more traffic in them if we did anything else? Sorry, that's it.
Thanks for that point. I mean, we haven't done that research, but I'm sure it would form part of a Camden proposal and their evidence base. So we can definitely speak to them, see if they've already done anything like that, and submit it to the group. We'll follow it up for you. I think it's a very good point about how how we should be smarter about using the space in between our buildings to really try and target some urban ills we face. So yeah, thank you for that point. We're breaking from Jonathan. Did you want a counterpoint? I know you raised your hand, or is it just a point? Well, I'll get to in the chat.
It's a counterpoint.
Then please.
You mind if I do come in now?
No, go
on. So just very briefly, I live in Boscastle Road. I've lived there 30 years. What I'm worried about is that, sorry, this is going to come across as aggressive, but the Chetwynd Road residents are very well organised, they're vocal, they do have a problem. There's a lot of traffic in that road, but equally it's the most direct route from Highgate Road, Gordon House Road up to Dartmouth Park Hill. It's the most direct route, it doesn't pass any major schools, and that traffic exists. It wants to get where it wants to get to, and if you turn Chetwynd Road one way, or you somehow restrict the traffic in that road, it's going to find other routes. Those routes are going to be Swains Lane, Croftdown Road, Woodston Road, Dartmouth Park Hill, in other words, right through the middle of the Dartmouth Park Conservation Area, which doesn't currently have, I mean, it does have traffic at times, but it's not that bad. I mean, even though somebody I think was killed in Boscastle Road, run over a child at one point, but it will simply displace, and giving rise to a major change of behaviour in terms of driving is going to take a long time. You know, we might be able to do that over time, but in the meantime, whatever you do in Chetwynd Road is just going to force that traffic to go in another way to get to and from the same place. And we're not as well organised and vocal in, I don't know, Swains, Croftdown, Woodson, Boscastle, Laurier.
You don't need to be.
We're just not. And I really don't want to find that because we're not, we find that we end up with a proposal that creates a whole load of displaced traffic. You know, that's really all I wanted to say as a counterpoint.
Thanks, Jonathan. I think that it's all valid points. We're gonna avoid getting into a sort of a counter discussion. I'm going to keep on going through, but just to respond, Jonathan, I think it's a perfectly valid comment that and I think it sort of supports, in my mind, the idea of an area-wide approach that needs to be considered. It's not tit for tat. We're not removing traffic from one and putting it on the other. That has to be a kind of a line in the sand as a metric for success going forward. And I certainly get that from your input. Equally, I think the idea about behaviour change taking a long time, you're right. I think there's definitely a point of we also don't judge the need for a new bridge by measuring people swimming across a river. So we need to kind of get those safe networks in to allow people to give people the choice of sometimes getting in, not taking the car and getting in their bicycle to go to the local shops, and that means making those quiet networks. So that's something we can do. But I thoroughly take your point and underline it about it can't be a tit for tat and can't be pushing. It's an area-wide approach that needs to consider that as a whole, and I support that. And I don't think it came across aggressive. I think it was a point well made. Susan Seymour, I'll invite you to make your point. You're talking about school traffic.
Yeah, it was only occurred to me when you put up that graph of how many of the children at the local schools get driven to school. My experience, and it seems to have been picked up in other people's comments, is that the traffic is not local schools, it's people driving children to schools elsewhere. I mean, I see it when I used to go to the gym and I would come back along Gordon House Road. And the difference between school holidays and term time on the traffic there, which of course feeds into Chetwynd Road, was enormous. So I think we need some research into where the traffic comes from and where it goes. And also then people say, oh, you know, you have to have vehicle access to shops in Swains Lane and York Rise. Well, again, a bit of research into who are the people who park in those areas. Are they driving from the local area to those shops, or who are they? And until we know that, anybody can assert anything they like about, you know, to bolster their case. But I just don't have the information to say, well, who is using these roads and for what reasons and when.
Thanks, Susan. So just addressing that issue of data, I mean, I'm sure as part of any scheme that Camden will be bringing forward, they'll be looking, because and there's some sort of rather terrifying data you can get these days around mobile phone GPS data with sort of apps that use sort of, they know where you live roughly and they know where you work roughly, and it can identify your rat running because they know where the phone is dormant at night and they know where the phone is dormant at day on the whole. So they can look back in time, so they can take 2019 data when we were still doing such activities, and it can identify those kind of things. So that might well form part of an evidence base for a Camden scheme down the line. I think the interesting thing for this group, I think it'd be good to discuss is, yes, we don't know why traffic's somewhere, we don't know where traffic is going or where it's come from. But do you want it on your residential streets? I suppose it's what what character do you want your residential streets to take? Do you want it to be the kind of street that basically someone driving down there is visiting a house, or that rather than trying to get somewhere outside of the neighbourhood, it's more, let's look inside the neighbourhood and think what we want for our streets, because that's probably what we can discuss with evidence at in this forum. It's what do we want the street outside your front door to look like? What sort of feel do you want it to have? I think that would be really important. But yeah, I take your point about evidence, and I'm sure we can certainly put that in the kind of the brief to hand over, as it were, about this evidence needs to be gathered going forwards. Catherine, Max, you made a point about greening. I've just got to your point around SUDs. Is that the same point you were sort of making before? Do you want to reinforce that? Or?
Yeah, pretty much. I'd been thinking it, and you put up a list. I can't remember which one it was, about possible options, greening stroke suds. I suspect there may be some people who need suds defined, which I'll leave. I do know, but it's not my job today to define. So it might be appreciated to explain that. But it was that.
Thank you. Okay, I'll give you a 10-second, no, it's probably 30-second. SUDS stands for Sustainable Urban Drainage Systems. Essentially, when water lands on the tarmac, on the hard paving, it goes into the drains you see on the road. In storm surge events, so in terms of hard rainfall, that can cause a backlog at the water cleaning centre, flooding that, and that costs a huge amount of money and has a huge damage to natural habitat. We can use planting beds essentially as storm surge slowing devices. So all the water that hits the hard paved areas goes into the plants and feeds the plants, so we get nice green streets. But it also means it squashes that surge. This year we've spoken so much about squashing grass down. It sort of squashes that sort of storm surge down. It means we would lessen the sort of flood damage we can get down the sort of water network. So it makes your streets green. That's probably the big takeaway. But it's also doing a lot of work in the background about protecting us from and adding resilience to our streets. Sorry about that, a little technical jargon. But David Metz, you've made a point around traffic. Would you like to make that?
Yes, I mean, reinforcing the point made previously, there's a huge amount of extra traffic in the morning when the schools are operating. Is this people dropping off kids at local secondary schools, or 4 of them in the neighbourhood? Or is it people dropping off children elsewhere and then go through our neighbourhood? There's also a related question of teachers travel to work by car. So if you look at Ackland Burley, there's a very big teachers' car park. Why is that? Well, probably because those teachers can't get to that school easily by public transport. Probably because they're doing east-west trips, which are difficult unless there happens to be a bus going in that direction. And that's really the problem with Chetwynd Road and Gordon House Road. It's serving an east-west travel. And even in London, where you've got many alternatives to using the car, if people are still using cars, we really need to understand whether they do have options, because if they don't have options, it's going to be very difficult to tackle the traffic that we see. So I don't think the question of who's using cars and why they're using cars is external to your study, as you were, I think, suggesting. That's, for Camden. I think unless we understand better who's using cars in our neighbourhood, it'll be hard to devise solutions to reducing traffic if that's what we want to do.
It's all good points. I think the idea that giving people options is of course a key one. At the moment, arguably there are fewer options. We do know that so we think about 35% of journeys made in London and made by London residents, I should add, are less than 2 kilometres. So on an average day, sort of London-wide, we're sort of into 6 million car journeys by London residents made per day. So that's 2 million journeys a day, which very arguably London-wide could be walked or cycled just on distance. Of course, a great many of them can't. A great many people who are making their journeys just don't want to. But I think if we start to sort of see the opportunity by if we can create these attractive walking and cycling networks and get half of that number, sort of obviously the local number, we're still talking about a large number of people. And I think that approach is certainly one to reflect on in terms of what we can do in this area, and just giving people choices, picking up on your first point, which I think was well made, and trying to reducing the sort of amount of traffic on streets, and that's something we've sort of language we've heard a lot about the last year, about sort of keeping the sort of streets for people who need to use the cars, be they teachers or other key workers who just can't use anything else at the current time, and also sort of freeing up public transport as well. The data point, I can certainly take it away as a point that sort of, and I think it's that GPS data is potentially becoming quite key for the sort of understanding your neighbourhood better, which would obviously be a Camden thing to pass on to Camden, and getting that GPS data, probably 2019 GPS data, would be more useful. So understanding, because obviously it gives us origin and destination, as well as routing and identify rat running as well. So that could be a really useful piece of information for you to have as a community, as part of any Camden study. So I can definitely take that as a way as an ask.
Yeah, we'll certainly be passing on these comments to Camden. So please be assured in that as well. So just conscious of time, Chris. There's a few comments that have been made around school traffic, which I think we've sort of covered through David's point there, with the issue being schools that are further afield, I suppose. I
was going to invite Christina Reynolds to make her point.
Unmute. Hi, can you hear me?
I can, yes, hello.
Hi, great, thank you. Well, first of all, I wanted to echo some of the comments that Jane Mayhew made. I mean, being a resident on Chetwynd Road, can't agree more with the impact of the sheer amount of traffic that we've been facing. I mean, as a parent of a 3-year-old who wakes up in the middle of the night and comes to my room because he's been woken up by an aggressive motorbike riding through the road, is kind of a daily occurrence, and I think it's just lack of speed bumps has been one of those. Pollution is a big concern for us. There's constant honking on the road at 8 and 9 in the morning, and I must say, I mean, what I'm seeing looking out of the window is not so many cars, but it's vans using our road as a cut through, and those vans are simply way too big for our road, which is already one of the narrowest roads in Dartmouth Park. I mean, it's simply too narrow for both two-way traffic and parking on both sides of the road. And I mean, what other points I wanted to make? I guess, well, it's also less concerning, but personally impacted. I mean, my car is full of scratches and dents because of that. I mean, and I think also, to respond to some other people's comments, I think it would be naive of us to think that Chetwynd and the likes problem can be solved by not displacing traffic. I mean, I think it's inevitable, but I think it's there is minor inconveniences for other residents on other roads versus a health impact and impact to well-being. So I think that absolutely needs to be taken into consideration. And I'm looking at those figures that you presented earlier by us exceeding the legal levels of pollution. I mean, that's got to be solved. So that's my opinion.
Thanks, Christina. I mean, the sort of you have to solve the air quality issues is a great takeaway that you finished on there. And again, thinking about that area-wide approach, which has been mentioned before about not reassigning, as it were, traffic onto other local streets is taken away from your remarks there. Just moving on, Ben Castell, you made your point. Do you want to make that to the forum and unmute?
Yeah, there's a couple of points really. I think what we're hearing is that most people think that it would be nice to have less traffic going down our residential streets, but there are obviously questions about the impacts of, as people have raised already, such as our neighbour on Boscastle. Obviously, the last thing you want to do is to take traffic off one street and put it down another residential street. And so I think there's a real question to be raised about if we are going to be starting to talking about blocking traffic, how wide the kind of the area is that you block it, and it could be that essentially the Highgate Road to Dartmouth Park Hill area is a logical unit for that. I think the other point is businesses. I've had lots of conversations over the last couple of years with local businesses and who are worried about the impacts of anything which changes the ability of people to pass by their premises or to park outside it. So it'd be interesting to hear some views about that one in particular. Yeah,
thanks, Ben. It'd be great to hear from businesses themselves if they're on the call as well. Of course, I think what we can do is sort of take away as a key design point is that we have to sort of design local streets to support business, and that would be sort of moving into a design phase, something to look at. All the evidence we have is we know now quite well the kind of streetscape interventions that benefit footfall. Essentially, there's a great document out there which you might want to take a look at called the Pedestrian Pound, put together by Living Streets, which is a sort of a longitudinal research document which has sort of mapped footfall over time after public realm interventions, because not necessarily views improvements, after public realm interventions, and it's given us quite a scientific base to look at the types of schemes which increase footfall. Which is, and some of the numbers in there are absurd. There's things like 900% increase in footfall from a public realm scheme, which I always think of numbers like that, and it's difficult to even compute, but obviously starting from a very low base. But yeah, and there are sort of 100%, 200%, these kind of numbers, which if we're thinking about increasing footfall past businesses, we know what that can look like. And equally, space, I think, for businesses has become really paramount over this last year, and the idea about how we can use the space outside businesses more sociably, more flexibly, and more attractively for those businesses, but also for the communities. And I think if I can certainly take away as a key action that the sort of the spaces we might look at in the future just have to support local businesses, because they're obviously a massive part of the energy and interest of the community. So I'll definitely take that away. And if there are any local businesses on the call, it'd be great to get your views as well, more specifically. Did I cover your points, Ben? I'm sorry, I sort of.
I think adequately enough, because I think, yeah, let's move on, let other people have their say.
Thanks. Lawrence Sampson, do you want to make your point? It's about Chetwynd Road. No. So our point in the chat was Chetwynd Road should definitely not be a road used for lots of through traffic. It belongs in the lower quadrant. So she's connected Chetwynd Road back to that graph I showed you at the beginning, thinking more about that local street. So bringing in that balance of scales, bringing down that movement function to increase the place function. That's something we can see what that would look like. Ben Cousins.
You also raised. Sorry, Chris.
Please go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say he did mention earlier about delivery vehicles using Chetwynd Road and some of the other streets more, but I think we've probably covered that off. Already,
yeah, I mean, it comes into that data angle as well, doesn't it? About knowing, yes, because obviously we want delivery vehicles to be able to deliver to houses, but do we want them to pass through? And I think it's a broader question about just general traffic in terms of do we want to allow traffic to pass through the area, or do we want to have it sort of accessing and then going, which is.
Can you speak to Anne Smythe as she runs Truffles in York Rise?
I can. Anne, go on. You're muted, just so you know.
Sorry, hi everyone. I'm new to this. I'm
Hello.
actually working, sitting in the telly trying to listen.
Mine's a flat white.
yeah, okay. Yeah, it's I think from York Rise Chetwynd Road Hub, I think we're a bit unique from the other hubs in that we do rely on passing trade. We don't have any buses that stop down a road or any trains. We solely rely on a lot of very low local support, but obviously we need more. We did do, I mean, historically the forum, the Dartmouth Park Forum do have everything that's been put through, but we are 15 businesses. About 9 of us are on York Rise and the rest of us are on Chetwynd Road. Obviously, the business on Chetwynd Road, they comprise of, we sort of more or less have the high street covered, to be honest, with the different kinds of shops that are here. But say, for example, the vets, they need people to come that they need to be able to park. So basically, they need to be able to park, they need to carry their sick animals, a retail shop where they obviously some of the foods are heavy, Backs and Beyond, actually did a survey a few years ago whereby they asked everybody who visited them to say how they travelled there.
Yeah.
And it was a huge amount that came by car. We've obviously got the gyms around the corner that people come for, again, for an hour or so. There's no parking in Chetwynd Road. They need to have access to pay and display. And the other little shops. And one thing I will say is that each of our shops are in every high street. You know, competition is high. An attraction for our shops is that there are times when you can park. You either, whether you pay and display or whether you come later and you nip to the shops here. There are other businesses. This is where some things would be of benefit for some businesses here and not maybe others. The talk of pedestrianisation, this was spoken about in the forum years ago when Walthamstow first did it. Mm-hmm. I personally went and visited that because some of the shops here were very anxious and worried about the prospect of that for some of the reasons that I've said. But clearly there would be about 3 businesses that would benefit from it out of the 15. I visited it there initially and there were protests from the retail shops. Firstly, Walthamstow is very different from our little hub because there are far many more businesses than we have here, in excess of 30. And they were all down one road, not split into 2. But the retail shops really come out of it very poorly. They had petitions, and they had problems with delivery. I can remember the paper shop said where people would just drive by to pick up their paper or whatever. They'd lost all of that trade. And clearly, you know, margins are tight, and not a lot of small independent traders can afford to take a loss. For it to be a bit greener, which would be lovely from my point of view. But I think what I would appreciate is if you are thinking of going down the route of reducing pay and display or taking away any parking spaces, if you would actually consult the businesses. Obviously, when we purchased the businesses, this was how it was. And to some of us, that was an attraction because you could park. From us at Truffles Deli personally, we have people that come from Muswell Hill, from, you know, all over. Actually, a few people come from Ilford. But so people do travel to us. And to be perfectly honest with you, we need that trade.
Yeah.
I've said lots, so I'm sorry I've taken up your time, but yeah, it's obviously is important to us that if any changes was to take place, that you would be kind enough to consult us.
Thanks for your point, Anne. I mean, the first thing to say is we're not coming up with any proposals. We're listening to you and recording your input, which was very valuable. What I've taken away is sort of loading is a requirement in terms of a sort of access, be that to the vet, be obviously sort of products and goods being brought to shops and the deli, of course. So vehicle access of some kind is definitely required in some way. I think it takes on what does that have to look like, and if that can go hand in hand with more greening, as you say, and more space, then that's good. But I've definitely taken away that sort of loading is a sort of vital requirement for your guys in particular, and those shops you say. So that's really good points. And absolutely, any scheme proposals being taken forward by Camden or other parties in the future would be consulting you. So that would be no problem there. But I've taken away as a key point about the access and servicing requirement is a must for you.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks
for your
very
time.
much.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Catherine Wells, you were speaking about narrowness of streets. Do you want to make that point?
Yes, actually, I want to make a couple of points, if I may.
Please, of course.
It was great that you produced your map at the beginning. I felt in a way, for my purposes, that map was a bit small because I'm a historian, I've studied the history of the whole area, so I know how the area developed. And there are, unfortunately, reasons, I'm not going to say good reasons, but there are historic reasons why Chetwynd Road and some others have become the busy routes that they have, not least things like the railways, the large number of Camden estates, which take up huge chunks of the area on all sides, both within the neighbourhood forum, but of course on all sides. Then we have the Heath, which is a green area, and Waterlow Park, Highgate Cemetery. So what we've got is, if you like, a landscape, a geography where there aren't, in fact, that many routes. And in the middle, we've got a little sort of loose grid of residential streets. And it just so happens, unfortunately, for those residents of Chetwynd Road, that they're just above the railway. And they are, as Ben Castell pointed out, the west-east or east-west route. To change that, and this is really my question, I would ask people, but you, the organisers, to come up with a few questions, ideas, thoughts, plans about where the traffic would go, because of course, we're not just talking about displacing it onto, let's face it, Dartmouth Park Road or wherever. We are talking about displacing it sort of, if it's coming along Gospel House Road or whatever, is it going to go all the way up, along, round and down? Is it going to go down south? Right down to the busy corner by Kentish Town and then up again. I do think that it's really, really important to think about where that traffic will go. I'm probably with some others. It's not in the short term going to go away. People like me, I will never be cycling in London again because I can't. I will walk, but if I need to carry heavy stuff apart from a trolley, which I do, I will be sometimes using a car. And I do think we've got to sort of look at the whole picture a bit more. I'm sympathetic to the residents of Chetwynd Road. Yes, it is a busy road, but the whole context, as you said at the outset, needs to be looked at. And I do think a map would help us, or would help these future conversations by showing the routes, not just within our area, but around. I also thought it would be more helpful, if you don't mind, to provide information about comparable traffic movements or pollution in our wider areas. So instead of talking about, I don't know, Marble Arch or something, I think honestly it would be more useful to us to talk about Holloway Road, to talk about Archway and similar streets. So I would quite like you to take that one away, please, and consider that. I think it's just more helpful to us and it's more relevant. And not least because one of the issues here is that we are historically on the key routes out of London going north. And that's something that's got to be kind of, taken into account. Dartmouth Park Hill was, one of the main routes out of London. And just finally, I just wanted to ask about how we can find out. It seems to me that actually vehicle use has increased, but from my visual experience, I live near Chester Road with a one-way system. An awful lot of it is delivery, car delivery, taxis, they're delivering, forgive me, they're delivering drugs, they're collecting money, they're doing all sorts of things. And I wonder how it's going to be possible, or whether you or the Mayor of London and so on have started exploring the increase in deliveries, whether it's people going to McDonald's on bikes to collect food. You see them queuing up to take to people who can't even walk there. So I think that's another important aspect to consider. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. There's lots of good points. I think the idea of, I spoke briefly about some of the sort of a longitudinal study about some of the other schemes across London which have tried to do these kind of things, and they have found that traffic doesn't simply get pushed to the perimeter roads around the area. there's a concept of traffic evaporation, which I'm probably not the preeminent expert on this call even, but people, and that's about giving people choices of doing other things, as I've mentioned before. So it does happen, behavior change does happen quite quickly if we allow it. But I fully get your point that we need to start thinking about where this traffic might go, and I suppose it's not really for this forum to think about. It would be a Camden would be doing that sort of transport modelling as part of any proposals they would come out with. We're not coming up with proposals in this group. We just want to hear what your kind of lines in the sand are. So I suppose I could take away the fact that you don't want sort of displacing traffic onto other streets. Might be a sort of thing to take away. And again, I think I've reinforced that idea of an area-wide approach is definitely something to look at. Sorry, Becca, do you want to come in?
No, I think that's it. Yeah, thank you for that, Catherine. Yes, I think Chris's point about an area-wide approach is probably the best one to be made. Although, again, to reiterate that we are putting together any designs ourselves.
And just on your point around deliveries as well. I mean, I know there's been a huge number of studies over the last 9 months looking at the increase in delivery drivers, and you just have to stand on the streets to see all the Deliveroo guys running around. And I think it's been a lot of work, and the Mayor of London has done a kind of last mile logistics strategy of late, and it's about thinking about that as well. I mean, an increasing number of companies are building last mile hubs in terms of they are sort of driving their goods into sort of further outside London, and then using bicycles to sort of strategically attack, if you want for a better word, areas. And that's something which has been invited by the Mayor's office, but also businesses are choosing to do it because of their sort of social corporate responsibility programs and actually wanting to do that. So that's also something we can think about. There's a growing number of sort of delivery by bicycle, and that's, you know, as much as sort of allowing them to have this sort of permeability as well as cost saving, and also them sort of their green standpoints. So I think that's something which you could sort of take forward as part of a neighbourhood approach, is where's our kind of delivery hub from which people would have to cycle. And that's something you could ask for as a community, especially maybe looking at a wider area rather than just the Dartmouth Park area, but where's a sort of local last mile logistics hub, and do you want to be asking for one? It'd be interesting if anyone's got any thoughts on that to put it in the chat, as I know we're sort of running out of time, but that'd be something to reflect on.
Say that Ocado are trying to build a huge delivery centre just not far from us in Islington. So I'm not sure they'll be doing bikes. I think the locals are very unhappy about all the big lorries coming into Islington. So again, I do think you're very good at making it sound good, but the reality, at least in what I'd call the short term, does require us, again, if you could take back that point about providing local in our surroundings readings and data and so on, rather than central London, I think it would be hugely helpful.
Yeah,
I would really care about Archway, Holloway Road, rather than Marble Arch, please. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Just to step in, Chris, Samantha has now got her audio sorted out, so if we can bring her in.
Oh, sorry, thank you. I just see, actually, I think Christina's just re-emphasised a point I did want to say, which I do understand that other residents don't want the traffic displaced to them. However, if we actually understand that Chetwynd Road is currently running at illegal pollution levels, I really do feel that something needs to be done. And while nobody else wants the problem, you know, there is an issue whereby things do need to be shared. So I was really quite shocked and upset when I saw the readings that you provided, and, you know, to hear, I've forgotten the lady's name, about the asthma and the people moving with regards asthma, you know, and this is really worrying. And I do think that as a community, we need to take on board that there has been that recent court case, you know, where damage was now paid, you know, with regards to air pollution, and so we cannot ignore this. And while I understand, you know, nobody else, you know, Boscastle, Dartmouth Park Road, they don't want the other traffic, but we do need to understand that this isn't just, Chetwynd Road is not the sacrificial lamb, and this cannot be ignored any longer. And then the other point which I wanted to make was with regards to the cleanliness. The streets in Dartmouth Park are so filthy. I mean, there's dog mess, there's litter. I mean, before it used to be with the Evening Standard, the Free Evening Standard, and those used to go everywhere. But do you know, I walk to Hampstead Heath most days and I cannot believe the rubbish. You know, there's mattresses. I mean, at the minute you've got all the Christmas trees, the trip hazards. I am fortunate that I do not have mobility issues. If you had mobility issues and you tried to walk down our streets, I swear to God, this can't be legal. You know, you've got cars that don't even remain in the car parking bays, you've got rubbish everywhere, then you've got dog mess. And I find it frankly unbelievable that we are meant to live in a nice residential area. And I find it just appalling. But sorry, that's a really big rant, you know, but I think I'm quite frustrated by what I see, you know. So sorry, thank you.
I can definitely take away the point as the cleaning point is a good one. We can report that back. Air quality. What's the kind of what's the metric that you want to sort of introduce as part of this designer's brief? Do you want there to be no illegal air quality in Dartmouth Park? Is that the kind of the baseline which you think any proposal in the future has to achieve, or is that too much? Is that too harsh? Where if we're going to sort of set a metric for success, where is it in your mind?
Do you know what happened? I looked at your presentation. I wondered, is it safe for me to breathe outside?
Yeah, well, that is a stark point. Yeah.
And so what I would like to know, I watch your presentation, I consider moving. I am so gobsmacked by what I am putting into my lungs. I used to live in Hertfordshire and we moved to London because we wanted a more London lifestyle. And I am deeply shocked and unnerved by what I see. And so I think there needs to be a point where you need to feel it's actually safe to go outside your house. I mean, obviously we've got this drama at the minute, but, you know, notwithstanding this, you know, to feel that I'm going to get polluted just by walking out my door.
Yeah, I mean, it's a striking point you make. I'm going to take away, if anyone, please question it if it's not right, I'm going to take away the idea of we should only accept legal air quality in Dartmouth Park as a sort of metric for future. Jonathan, you're raising your hand. Is that for a counter, or should we get to you? You're muted. Muted, Jonathan. Jonathan, you're muted. If that's a.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm going to be really brief because I've already spoken. Just to say I don't support that metric. If you adopted that air quality metric for traffic planning across London, you could end up with some crazy results. The air quality issue is a central government issue. There are targets which have been adopted. We all know they're very demanding targets, and there are lots of national and local initiatives to improve the air quality in London. I mean, you're not going to do it by traffic planning within such a tiny area. It's just not realistic. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say.
No, and I support you challenging it. I think it's perfectly fair. That's why I offered it up. I think that obviously the mayor's office has more micro ambitions than the national government as well in terms of air quality. So I mean, we could just take away that air quality should fall in line with London targets, and that might be a fairer reflection if that's something we feel comfortable with. And that's obviously is the case in terms of policy. John Slater, you're waving at me, and I haven't got to you yet. So would you like to make a point?
Well, I'd like to make a number of general points, but
very good.
If I'm jumping the queue,
you've got the mic now, so why don't you go for it?
Okay.
Oh, sorry, you just muted yourself for some reason.
Sorry, John. Can't hear you, John.
I unmuted?
Yeah, I got you now. I'm not quite sure what happened.
I'm muted now.
And what is going on?
And you just muted yourself again, John. Sorry.
Sorry, John. You.
Okay. Yeah, quite a lot of interesting points. I mean, I think everyone would agree that one's got to try and reduce traffic generally, and this is not really a Dartmouth Park area as such, because if you try to switch traffic within Dartmouth Park, you're just going to put it onto other roads. I think there's some very interesting points made about the architecture of the streets, that in fact, you know, we've got traffic, sorry, the roads are not all that wide. The width of the road, the width of the pavements isn't all that right. And I can't really read my writing, but and the climate and so forth. And I think a lot of this puts a lot of restrictions on what you can do. I mean, you made some, I missed part of the reintroduction, but all this idea of streets of shops and wide roads with boulevards with plantings and so forth is a bit unrealistic to this. I mean, we can do a certain amount in the area, but and I think there are a lot of interesting points made about schools traffic, and in a sense, just going back to this the issue of the architecture, we do seem to, in London to be, and especially in Camden, to be doing a huge amount of building, mainly of council, I think, or housing, but this does reduce the green spaces and so forth, and certainly there's huge amounts going on in the Camden area. Yes, I think, I mean, there are no easy answers to how we reduce the traffic. I mean, we do have a lot of elderly people, and it's the points are well made that the elderly can't, in the day, shop on the buses if they can't bring back their grocery shopping. But we're getting a huge amount of vans, and whether this is actually increasing the traffic, because people are ordering from all sorts of different places rather than going to a shopping centre and getting all their needs and so forth. So it's that's another point to take into account. Cycling is difficult because I mean, we're having these problems in Swains Lane with the club cyclists who sweep along and make it very difficult for pedestrian crossing, for pedestrians crossing. And so forth. So, and you know, putting bicycle racks on the road do make life even more difficult sometimes. But I've made a number of suggestions in the note I sent. And
thank
so
you.
forth.
Can I tease out a few points? You mentioned crossing on Swains Lane. Would you want to see sort of better crossings on Swains Lane? Is that, I mean, the club cyclists aside, and I've certainly seen them. Is it sort of just in terms of a high level ask? Is better crossing of Swains Lane something you would like to see?
Yes, no. This is a crossing we've been looking for because the traffic is coming, particularly at the roundabout.
Yeah.
And the shops are near the roundabout, so that crossing will help. But of course we've got the shops at one end and then we've got the residential area at the other, and okay, it will slow the traffic at that corner, but how we manage to slow the traffic at the other part is a more difficult point.
So I don't want to sort of simplify your remarks because you're making them well, but I suppose just to sort of take away a sort of action list that you want to give to the council. Sort of the crossing, there's a crossing coming you speak of, but that idea of being able to more easily cross Swains Lane is something that I'm hearing, and also the idea of potentially slowing vehicles on Swains Lane you referred to. Are those two things you would like, or am I misinterpreting you?
Well, I mean, the problem is at the moment it's very difficult to get anything out of the council, but it does seem that the council are not very imaginative in dealing with some of these issues. I mean, we've been talking to the council about this crossing at the roundabout for the last 5 years, and you know, I mean, certainly in the last 18 months, the staff, they've been so obsessed with these other restriction measures that, and I assume that the staff are working from home, and maybe a lot of them are working on some of the other issues, such as giving vaccinations and so forth. I suspect some of the staff are being deployed outside the council or for other measures, perhaps you know, helping with supplying food to those not able to get away from their houses and so forth.
Just to jump in on the crossing point, Ben at the Dartmouth Park Forum has just reminded me that the council are consulting currently on the new crossings there. I'll just put a link to that consultation so everyone can see it. So it seems like after your 5 years of waiting, they are finally bringing something in, which is good news.
Thanks for that.
So if you're obviously do respond to that, everyone, if there's something.
But you see, related to that, there's got to be some changes to the loading bays and so on, and often the traffic regulations make this easier, because it's no good having bays in front of the shops that have local traders parking their vans in for the whole time and restricting. It's very difficult if you, I mean, they're not very flexible in saying that you can only park in a loading bay for half an hour. Something like this. The regulations make it difficult for them. I mean, understandably, they don't want too many different regulations in different streets, and so they become a bit hidebound, and so it's going to be difficult. And it's very difficult to get them to sit down and talk about what would be the best way to have loading bays that would serve the pedestrian, the shoppers, and those running the shops in a fairly small area, in a residential street. And I think, I mean, the person in York Rise made similar points.
Right,
well,
so we're just conscious of time.
Thanks for that.
So Ben Cousins and Joanna P, I think, are both privately.
Because there is a pay and display bay that is only operational from 10 to 12, but somebody can stay in that bay for an hour and a half.
So yeah, I mean, I've taken away that we need to be sort of smarter on sort of loading and parking bays, and sort of make sure we use them for the right things. From your comments, that were well made. If I can invite Ben Cousins to make your point, and I'm conscious Terry's also waving at me, so I've got you there, Terry. Don't worry. But Ben, would you like to make your point?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's been a really interesting conversation, and I concur with a lot of the points made, and in the chat as well. I think there does need to be an equitable solution for the whole area, not just Chetwynd Road. I think that's really key. I do live on Chetwynd Road, so I'm concerned about the impact that the traffic and the problems have on Chetwynd Road, because I see it day in, day out, ranging from cars parking on the pavement at the top end where it doesn't allow pedestrians to access the pavement properly. We have complaints of neighbours who can't access the road from their front door. They can't get their wheelchairs on, they can't get buggies onto the road, onto the pavement, because the cars are parked too far over. And you can see why. It's like a furrow, isn't it? The cars have just been pushed aside. These roads are not designed, were not originally designed to take this level of cars and traffic, and it just seems nonsensical to have cars parked on the pavement in the way that they have. We're talking about an equitable solution, but this is 30 years plus of unequitable solutions that have really made Chetwynd Road a very, very difficult place to live and to navigate on. And it shouldn't be right that because we bought a house on Chetwynd Road means we have to put up with this. This is something that is going to be, if we can solve the problem, it will be of benefit to everybody in the area. Clearly there's pollution levels across the whole of the Dartmouth Park area which are higher than they should be. There's more traffic than there should be. This is a solution that will also mean that places like Dartmouth Park Road and Boscastle, Laura, etc., have less traffic. The solution has to be that it's equitable for everybody, not just for Chetwynd Road. So I think we really do need to focus on the wider area as the goal for solving the whole big problem of the area, not just on Chetwynd Road. But it is clearly that Chetwynd is the bottleneck, and if we can deal with that, then I think we can solve a lot of problems.
Thanks for that, Ben. Yeah, good points. I think the sort of equitable takes two sort of strands in my mind. It's actually the Equalities Act, which Chetwynd Road is sort of arguably slightly on a thin ice on, in terms of being able to sort of unimpeded walk down the pavement, which is something we need to try and get try and improve, and also the sort of equality of not sort of pushing traffic onto other streets, and that area-wide approach we've spoken about a lot. That's sort of two key messages coming out, as well as the air quality, and sort of seeing air quality as a whole around Dartmouth Park is something which I'm certainly taking away from your points. Thanks very much. I'm conscious we were supposed to finish at 1:30. I'm going to run it until 2, just because we do have a 2-hour slot. We thought a lunchtime slot would probably be a bit shorter, but I'll run it till 2, just in case. But if anyone has to drop off, then feel free. But there's still plenty to get through and plenty of conversation, so I'll give us that extra 20 minutes. Terry, I said I was going to bring you in. Just unmute yourself there. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thanks, Terry.
Thank you. Right. Could I just say a word on behalf of Gordon House Road?
Yes.
It doesn't get much of a coverage really with the Dartmouth Park Lakeshore Forum, and yet the forum does go right the way down to the railway bridge,
yes,
which carries the gospel to Barton. And I've lived in Gordon House Road for over 40 years now, and I guess I can understand I have a lot of sympathy with people in Chetwynd Road and Dartmouth Park generally, because the residential population there is much higher than it is in Gordon House Road. We only have residents down one side of the road, and by and large, a lot of those people are transient. They move in and out of flats, and they come and go at fairly regular intervals. So perhaps they don't have a sort of an identity with the road that I do. I live in Heathview, and I say I've lived there for 40 years. 3 brief points. One is the volume of children that come from the 4 schools in the area. They come down Lisbon Gardens and they go up Lisbon Gardens. They come down the Heath and they go up the Heath, regular periods at the start and the close of the day. And that does create an enormous volume of extra pedestrians on the road, a very busy road, as we all know. The second point is on weekends, it's also quite busy. We have a particular problem on a Sunday when people park all the way down Gordon House Road, right the way down to Lisbon Gardens. And this causes an enormous problem for buses, ambulances, and other large vehicles. And the third point, which you may not be aware of, which I think is quite important for now and for the future, this relates to the Murphy's Yard entrance, which is just before the first bridge in Gordon House Road. Now this is part of a redevelopment programme, which I know that the Dartmouth Park Forum is interested in, but there is something that is relatively new, that this entrance is now used 24/7. It never used to be like that, because I only live 50 metres from the entrance to Murphy's Yard, and it used to always just be normal contractors' times, Monday to Friday. But now that they have diversified and removed a lot of their heavy plant out of London, they've let off space in Murphy's Yard, close to Gordon House Road exit, for other small companies. And there is now traffic in and out of there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now that is obviously going to add to the problem that Gordon House Road has, which will then be passed on to places like Chetwynd Road and Dartmouth Park. That's it.
Thanks, Terry. Some very clear points to take away. Thanks for that. I've just seen in the chat that some people were saying, were wondering if this was an hour and a half, but it was always billed as an hour and a half. So apologies for anyone who's been detained by that. Joanna P, I've just got you down as that. Do you want to make your point?
Hi, yeah. Hi. So there's 2 main things I wanted to flag. So the first is, so this is more of a pre-pandemic point, just to speak to the magnitude of the traffic problem on Chetwynd. So we have a traffic monitor set out in our home, and
that's in your house, is it? Okay.
So the busiest times were always evenings and weekends. So I think this misconception of it being a school-run problem, I just wanted to kind of clarify that it's definitely not just a school issue. I think Saturday or Sunday was the busiest times. And that also aligns with a survey, like a data I've seen from the council done a few years ago. And so pre-pandemic, like the traffic on Chetwynd is continuous. And I think this needs to just be acknowledged. Like 3 a.m., it's continuous. And that impacts people's ability to sleep. Your ability to sleep impacts mental health, anxiety, depression. I think that's actually a really important thing to consider. And to your point that was raised earlier, Chetwynd is predominantly residential. I think there's about 5 businesses, and the rest is door to door to door to door to door individuals. There's no parks, there's no big, broad commercial spaces. It's all really heavily residential. So that is a big deal. The other thing I wanted to just point out on the pollution levels is I developed an immune disorder since moving to Chetwynd Road that has been linked to pollution. And I think I feel like this pollution argument almost like gets pushed around quite a bit as this vague thing that's hard to identify, but like this could happen to anyone living on Chetwynd Road. Mm-hmm. And I think these are real medical risks that like they're real, like this is happening. Anytime I talk to an immunologist or to a doctor, I'm always told that it's just, there's a lot of these immune issues that are arising caused by pollution. And I think anything that we can do to reduce it and to manage it really should be a priority for everybody. And I agree with some of the points raised earlier on this topic as well. So
thanks, Joanna. That's very well made points. The idea of of the health impacts of our streets is of huge importance to the mayor, actually, to the mayor's office. And you might have heard that the sort of Transport for London and the mayor's office, they sort of conduct their streets around a sort of healthy streets approach. So there is, I mean, I won't get into that now, but it's essentially a scoring matrix to sort of show how successful your street is in impacting your health. And read into that sort of personal, physical, mental health, but also health of communities and health of businesses. And we could start to think, and it's not something I don't discuss now, it's something we could maybe talk about later, sort of in one of the next sessions, is we're sort of setting a kind of target for streets in the area to be a certain level on that healthy streets checklist as kind of what might be seen as successful in the future. That's something we could think about. And maybe it's something for you to think about and feedback on another time. But certainly that idea of we should recognise the impact that our streets have on our personal health and design them to improve our health is something that I'd take away from your points there, Joanna. So thank you for that. Richard Keep, you've got a point around the Murphy's site, which maybe relates to Terry's. Do you want to make that?
Yeah, hi.
Hello, thank you.
I think it was just, to follow up from what everyone said, it seems the crux of the matter is just the fact that there's an east-west desire line and there's nowhere for it to go, no obvious way for it to go. And with the development of this Murphy's Yard site that Camden are in the process of doing a master plan for, or to some extent done a master plan for, whether it's worth flagging to them that an alternative route might be created through there to take some of the traffic away. So I think the only way it's going to reduce off Chetwynd Road without being detrimental to any of the other roads is to actually take it away somewhere else. And that's either going to be Swains Lane or it's going to be taking it up to Highgate. Other than that, then sort of Dartmouth Park is just going to become a filter for all this traffic, which at the moment all seems to go down Chetwynd Road. But I just thought it'd be worth flagging that up with Camden if that was something they would consider.
It's certainly something we can put to them as part of the feedback. I think that a really interesting thing to sort of take away is we're talking about traffic in this respect of the only way through is Chetwynd Road, and I think as residents you can. There's two sides of it. Yes, that is correct. It is the sort of simple geographical makeup. It means that Chetwynd Road is one of the few east-west links. For a little while, there are clearly others. But I think that the stronger point is, so what? If we're of the mind that it's a residential street, and whilst residential streets should very much allow and invite access to residential properties, but we might be of the mind that. But that doesn't mean we should allow through movement of people just trying to get through the area. So it's almost like I put it to you as this group that it's at this stage of the process, maybe we don't need to worry about what are the other routes, what are the other strategic links. It's sort of, do you want it on Chetwynd? Do you want it in Dartmouth Park? And if that's I think the sort of the strategic road network is more important than my residential street. We should definitely let Chetwynd Road be that link for the good of London. Then that's fine, that's the view. But if your view is, no, it's a residential street, it should take residential traffic, it shouldn't allow through traffic on a London significance, then at this stage, let's not worry where it's going. because there'll be plenty of people worrying about that later in the process. It's more, what do you think now is the point of, like, do you want to worry about London's strategic network of traffic, or do you think it's a residential street, it should take residential traffic, and people trying to move through London, fair play, but not on my street? That's a legitimate sort of debate to have, without getting too bogged down in the data, because there'll be plenty of other people getting bogged down in the data later. I wonder if anyone's got, as we sort of move to the close, I wonder if anyone's got opinion. Samantha Collett, you've said, you've responded to me. Do you want to make that point? And I welcome anyone else.
Jane,
well, sorry, I was
sorry.
I was just going to say, I thought that you made a good point that we're not London Transport in terms of trying to understand this traffic. So if this is what I wanted to agree, then I just wanted to agree with you. I don't want the through traffic. I'm more than happy for access only and for deliveries. But I guess I'm sick to death of being a rat run and a cut through.
Yeah, that's well put. Jane, you wanted to come in? Sorry, you're on mute. Oh, yeah, you know that, sorry.
Just one point there, and it backs up very much what you're saying about Christopher, about how we shouldn't really be bogged down with why, what's going to happen to the traffic. Very briefly, many years ago, I worked for ministers on the development of the M25, and the highway planners very emphatically and totally correctly, as it came about, said, if you build it, they will come. And the M25, as you probably will be aware of, there was nothing there before the M25. And as soon as it was built, wham, all the cars went that way. And that was pre-sat nav, but imagine now, of course, it'd be even more so. So I think that it is absolutely wrong for us to say, oh gosh, where are they going to go? They're going to, because actually I know, because I hear them outside and they're sat navs, they're coming from miles and miles and miles away. And they're going miles and miles and miles away. Even a lot of the delivery traffic are not coming to us. They're going elsewhere. So I just thought it's worth, I very much support what you're saying, Christopher, and I can endorse it historically from what happened on the M25.
Thanks, James. Well put. For interest, there's a study from the University of Toronto, which is probably the seminal work on that, entitled "The Fundamental Law of Road Congestion," and it looked at road building projects over a 50-year period and found that it was an exact correlation of 1 vehicle mile driven per 1 mile of road built, which actually means building roads is completely pointless if you're trying to stem congestion and reduce traffic, which is an interesting aside. But Ben Cousins, you came in on the chat. Do you want to make that point just in terms of his last closing remarks?
Yeah, thanks. I really agree. I think Chetwynd Road has to be, on all the feeder roads, I'm not just isolating Chetwynd Roads, has to be a local road for local people. And the whole area has to be defined as a local area with local roads for local people. And we absolutely need to allow traffic to come in and to go out for that feeds the locality, but and including deliveries and everything else. But we have to consider this really carefully as being a local area for local people, with the roads associated with that, and not allowing east-west traffic to rat run through it unnecessarily. There are plenty of other streets in the area that can take volumes of traffic that we currently have within this area. It would make a significant difference to Chetwynd Road, particularly, and all the other streets in the area, if we were to remove the traffic away from this road particularly, and it wouldn't have that much of a detrimental impact to my view, to those other surrounding roads beyond the area that are designed to take much larger quantities of traffic.
Thanks for that. It's well made. I'm going to sort of wrap up the session now, I think, just because we've ran on a bit longer to get everyone's comments in, and I'm conscious of that. I think there's been great sort of takeaways. I'll just reiterate the point that we're not coming up with proposals. We're sort of making a record of the community's asks and wants and lines in the sand. So we've taken some points from both sides, and we're not just listening to one sort of viewpoint. We're definitely taking a view on we need to maintain access for servicing for businesses, to protect those businesses. That's a really key point that Anne made very well. We must maintain that, and we have to maintain access, of course, for residents. But we've seen some support for the idea of But that being said, we're not a through traffic. We're not here for the Good London Strategic Network. So I'm going to bring the session to a close and just thank you all. There will be another session on Monday, which will be a complete mirror of this. So you're welcome to attend it, but you don't need to attend it because it's going to be exactly the same format. Just to catch people who might be on holiday this week, if you remember what holidays were, or might just not be able to, and it's going to be in the evening in case you can't make it at lunchtime. So feel free to attend it. Please do ask others, your neighbours, your friends, to attend it if they haven't attended this one. That would be great. Yeah, we'll do a mirror of this session then. We'll then be feeding back, kind of presenting to you kind of lines in the sand, what was sort of the community charter of what a scheme must do to be successful in your eyes, and would invite comment on that. That's by no means sealed. That was for inviting comment. So I'll offer any closing remarks to Becca or anyone else who might want to, but then I'll bring the session to a close. Becca, anything for you?
Yeah, I mean, you said that very well. I think, yeah, just to thank everybody for coming along, and again to reiterate next Tuesday evening's session. So anyone wasn't able to come, please do let them know. We want to have a really wide variety of voices and let everybody have their say. It's really important. Also, if if anybody that wasn't able to make either session, both will be available. As you know, we've recorded this, they'll be available online, so they can always have a watch and see what was said. So that's for that, and yeah, I think that's it from me really. Yeah, we haven't finalised the date in February for us to feed back our findings, but if you signed up to this, I will send you an email and let you know as soon as we can.
And just responding to a point Joanna's made on the chat, there's been lots of links put into the chat. I have saved the chat. We will be giving you that back along with the recording as a resource. So all those links are sort of there for you to delve into at your leisure. But apart from that, just going to say thank you very much. I hope you found it useful, and I look forward to continuing the conversation in due course. So I'll bring it to a close and wish you a very good afternoon.
Thank you all. Have a good weekend.
Thanks very much.
Bye. Bye.